Okay, so today I'm going to be teaching you how to paint a June beetle or junebug, one of those green iridescent looking ones with watercolors. So the first thing you're going to want to do is find yourself a reference photo, which I will not be including because I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to get copyright struck. And you're gonna start with just a basic pencil sketch.
So they've got pretty much, I don't know how I want to draw it, pretty much a little head, and then they have like this little big neck piece off of their head. And then their body is pretty much just their two wings down with a little triangle on where they don't meet, right there. Excuse the train going by if you can hear that. Oh, and now sirens, because that's just what I needed in my video. And so you're just gonna come up with some sort of sketch that looks something like this. It doesn't have to be too perfect quite yet. And then they have 6 legs and some antennas, so just add those however you think you want your beetle to be. Sometimes the front ones kind of look like they're coming out of the neck piece, and then they have one right at the top here, and one down here that I usually like to draw going sort of down and then out. And so I'm just gonna work on this sketch, so please enjoy the squeaky noises of me watching a silly little
Apologize for my hand being in front of it. This is the only setup that I can manage. I also only have one hand, so I can't hold my phone on the other side, so this is all we're getting.
So after I have most of the sketch completed, which there's going to be paint going over this, so it doesn't need to be perfect and clean, doesn't need to be a lot of detail in it. I like to just go through and lightly erase it, just so that if I choose to kind of move the shape around, or I don't paint perfectly in the lines or something, you can't see as much pencil, and you don't have to rub at your work after the fact. And for the legs, you can really do any sort of shape that you want. You just have to kind of know that there's almost like an elbow joint in there, no wrist, and kind of like a little shoulder that you can see here on the front 4. And then these back ones are kind of like a thigh and a knee. So I'm just gonna lightly erase so you can still see most of your sketch, but I also tend to draw pretty heavy when I'm sketching things out and just go over things with more and more lines, so you could skip this step if you just wanted to lightly draw a sketch. Alright, and so now we are ready for paints. Alright, so for paints, I just have a pretty basic watercolor palette, just one of the cheap ones. It's got 2 sides, so luckily I do have a few different shades to choose from. But watercolor is pretty generally easy to mix as long as you just kind of get a blotch of water on it. You can see on the cover is where I've been doing a lot of my mixing. But watercolors are also extremely buildable, so you don't even have to necessarily mix them beforehand. You can kind of just put a color down, and then depending on the effect you want, you can either continue coloring with a new color on top of it while it's still wet and it'll blend together, or if you dry, it'll give a little bit of a light effect, but watercolors do tend to lift a little bit after they're dry and then they get wet again. But not completely. It is not a way to erase, unfortunately. And for brushes, I have these super cool water pen things. And they just look like, sorry, takes a minute to get a lid off. They just look like normal brushes, but you squeeze them and the water comes out, and so you just don't need a separate bowl for things. So to begin painting, I always like to start from lightest to dark. So I'm going to begin with just a little tiny bit of a yellow, and just add some where the highlights are going to be. So you want to kind of pick where the highlights are going to be, kind of on a, if you have it on like a perspective, you can kind of pick where you want where the light to come from. I'm just going to do a top light, so it's just going to be, the highlights are going to be mostly in the middle where it's more rounded up at the top. And like kind of like here-ish. And then I even just add a little bit on the head. And a little bit on the other side as well. So that's good for the yellow. It doesn't need to be too much because most of the kind of shifting colors of the beetle are green. And so next we're going to go in with a light green and just kind of go around it. A little bit of green in my yellow at first, so they're not really too contrasty. I don't want them to be too contrasty quite yet. Kind of want to do that towards where it goes out of the color shifting and it goes back to boring old beetle colored. So you're just going to add these around, kind of, in a way, blending out the yellow to a darker color, so. And so for the rest of the colors here, there are pretty much two options. You can go for a solid darker green, that's just like a pure green, and then kind of blend it out to like a brownish, beetly color. Or what I'm going to do is go for more of a cool toned green with a little bit more blue in it, and then blend it out to a black. And so I just kind of blended that out around a bit more. You can see here I added a bit of like some texture lines just because I felt like it was just kind of a little too harsh. I actually am going to go in with just a little bit of a more typical green and, or a more solid green, more pure green, however you want to say it. And just kind of go in and blend it in a bit more to the yellow, which I am doing by loading up more water and less pigments onto my brush, so that the more I it'll kind of spread a bit more and kind of fade into it a bit better. Bugs aren't perfect. Bugs are a little funky looking sometimes, so there's nothing wrong with it. So I think this looks pretty good. I'm actually just going to go in and add a few more highlights that are just going to be the lighter green and a bit of the dark green maybe, but I really just kind of want to give a little bit more definition to some of the shape. And so now I've got something that looks a bit like this. It's not super beetly looking yet. So I like to go in with just a black, keep it a bit loose and watery, and fill it in at first. Just fill in the rest of these spaces. detail, which honestly you could do with a Sharpie or something of the sort. I just painted my makeup bag while reaching for a paper towel. But I'm just going to go in with more pigment and less water so that it's a super dark black. And I'm gonna start, I'm gonna carve out right here where the two wings meet, and a little bit around the neck, and then all the way down the spine to separate the two wings. And then the legs have a little bit of thickness to them. So these four ones have like this, a little bit of like a shoulder joint here. It's kind of like a little rectangle. And then it's kind of gets thicker down here, but also it's a watercolor bug. You could probably leave it as normal sticks and nobody would think it looked weird. And then the ends of their legs are very textured, bumpy. Kind of got little balls to them. And then the antennas are just a bunch of those little balls. Kind of like that. And the thing that I love about watercolors is they kind of have their own style, that certain details are just assumed that they won't be there because it's watercolor and it would just blend away. So if you don't want them to be blended away at all, I would recommend using a Sharpie, but if you really don't mind about the bleeding and the losing some of the shape that you're creating, I like to just keep going with the watercolors. And then the bottom legs, they just don't have this little shoulder joint, but they're the same. They get thicker, and then there's a bit of like a ball sort of texture here. So I'm just gonna finish those up real quick. So now that the legs are all finished, I'm just going to go in and do some more finishing touches. So I'm going to make the edges around this a bit darker. Just don't like how kind of gray it's looking instead of black. Bit more darkness to this section here. Don't know what it's called, if it's like, I'm not an entomologist, but neither are you probably. Just gonna darken that up a little bit, and then we're gonna take as dark as we can get our watercolors to separate the head from these little shoulder guys, and then here to separate the back from these little shoulder guys. I'm going to take this same dark, because this little in-between spot has kind of faded and lost its definition of being darker, to give it the illusion that it's under it. So I'm going to add a little bit more to that again. And we're looking pretty good. The only thing I want to do now is just play around with blending out some more of the green to black. So I'm going to grab some of the dark green again. Just kind of blend them out. I'm using the bluer, sort of teal color that I have. I'm kind of using it to blend into the black. I like to add these little kind of texture stripes to it. I don't know why. The backs of beetles are a bit textured. They have a lot of little dots on them, which I personally am not going to add, but you sure could and I'm sure it would look amazing. That is just not what I am going for right now. I think that would look better if I were to add more details with Sharpie, but since I'm kind of keeping this very bare and mostly focused on the colors and the detail and shapes of the beetle, I just think it's a bit unnecessary.
Alright, and so I think we are about done here with our beetle. I bet yours looks just as amazing. Thanks for watching.